Welcome back to another edition of the Here We Go podcast. I am your host, Trent Ging. You already know Colin Phillips down there on the bottom of the screen. And we have a special guest with us today, Jeff Hartman. And I would name all of the different things that you're on, but dude, there's like a million in your bio. So fan for sports, you're a host of a number of different podcasts. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, I do a lot of different things on a lot of different topics. The Steelers are the top of the list, though.
Loving it. I thought this was a relevant time to kind of talk about how to build out a roster because as you look through like social media, so much of what you see on there is just that this team is just not where a lot of people thought they were, or we're not that close, and we start seeing the comparisons online when we start watching the Bills and the Chiefs and the Eagles and of course other teams. And so like I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about like how you build out a roster, because I think every team does it a little bit differently. And we've seen some of the things that have or have not worked in the Steelers of recent years. So I kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit. So like, Jeff, I'm going to start with you on the first question here. So every team builds this out differently. What do you feel like is kind of the best way to construct a roster right now?
Through the trenches is my answer. And you saw Andy Weidl's fingerprints already started like in the last draft with how they really focused on the offensive line. And Art Rooney, when he met with media on Monday, talked about how they need to get a stronger defensive front. I agree 100%. I mean, you watch the teams that are still playing football, even of the last weekend. So the conference championship, go back to the divisional round. Almost all those teams had really good play in the trenches. And if that's what you aspire to be, if you want to be a good running team, you got to have a good offensive front. If you want to be a team on defense, think back to those Dick LeBeau eras where they made teams one-dimensional. What did they do? They shut down the run. You couldn't run on the Steelers, so you had to try and throw, and that just played right into their hands. If the Steelers want to be that dominant presence, you got to dominate the line of scrimmage, and that's, I feel like, and sometimes it's not their fault. Injuries do happen. We look at the offensive line. Wasn't it until like week 6 that they finally had a solidified unit for more than 2 weeks? So Stuff does happen, and you got to recognize that. But I think that in terms of building up this team, it starts in the trenches. That's my own personal belief. And then you just go out from there. I know before we were record, Colin was talking about drafting a running back in the first round. Like learn your lesson. I think that's exactly what he said. You had Najee Harris as a first-round pick with no offensive line in front of him. What the hell are you doing? You just did it backwards. Start with the line, then get the running backs, and then it'll take care of itself.
Agreed. Colin, how about you? What do you feel like is the best right now?
1,000% agreed. I mean, and like Jeff said, that all the teams that were actually, not necessarily relevant but competitive with some of these teams, with the Chiefs and the Lions and et cetera, they're all very strong up front, both sides. Philadelphia, I mean, dude, Howie Roseman, every year it seems he's always taking an interior defensive lineman. He's taking an edge rusher. He's taking an offensive lineman. I think, they have kind of got lucky in hitting on things. Landon Dickerson was a 3rd rounder. Jordan Mailata was a 7th rounder. Lane Johnson was drafted 12 seasons ago. Cam Jurgens, I believe, was a 2nd rounder. Now, and again, the Andy Weidl fingerprints have absolutely been all over these drafts, like Jeff said. I mean, 2023, you trade up for an offensive tackle. 49th overall pick, you take a defensive tackle. 7th round, you take a swing interior offensive lineman for depth purposes. This draft too. I mean, the 2024, you drafted an offensive tackle in the 1st, a center in the 2nd, and then a guard in the 4th. So I think, if it were me personally, I would definitely go in the trenches this draft as well. I'm working on getting my defensive lineman stuff done for you, and I'll send it your way. But I mean, starting with the trenches, both sides of the ball is absolutely the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and I think a big part of this is we've not only taken bad picks with so much skill position and not addressing the trenches for a long time. It was no secret, like DeCastro and Pouncey and all these guys were getting older, and we did nothing to address it. And that was kind of mind numbing. And it was like, all right, let's take a receiver. Oh, wait, let's go next year. Let's take a receiver. Oh, wait, let's take a running back. Like we're drafting so backwards from where you need to be right now in this day and age. You cannot win without effective guys up front. And the thing I think that, we're modeling ourselves around the Eagles kind of playbook, so to speak. And I think that one thing that they're doing well is they're drafting a year ahead. And, you saw Jordan Davis getting drafted when Fletcher Cox is kind of at the end of his rope, right? Like they're not waiting. They draft a center when Jason Kelsey is still there. And it's like the Pittsburgh's not in that luxury right now. That's what we need to get to. And so I think that's been a big thing is it really looks like a lot of our draft classes prior to Omar Khan the last 2 years just kind of fell flat on their faces because we've gotten no return. How many of these guys are still here? I mean, think back, 3-4 years. How many of those guys are still on the roster even right now? You got to start counting these guys as misses, whether they hit somewhere else or not. I think that's a big issue for us right now. So like, I wanted to bring this up kind of as a kind of comparison opposite almost to what the Eagles have done. What about building a team through the draft or free agency? Because we've seen it done differently. I think we're talking about the Eagles drafting a lot through, or building through the draft. But you see a team like the Rams a couple of years back really sell out everything that they had to go get, people to bring in. Where do you guys stand on that as far as building through free agency or trying to build through the draft specifically? Colin, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, real quick, there is one thing I wanted to add here, because you kind of had me thinking about it here. I think you said the Steelers need to get to that point where they can draft a year ahead, and I feel like at the end of Colbert's tenure, you could tell he was kind of getting desperate. He would be drafting for need instead of the best player available. I think the best teams draft the best player available. The Packers are great at it. The Chiefs, the Eagles specifically, the Ravens are great at it too. You saw 2018, you take a safety that's really really should have been a third rounder. 2019, you trade up for a middle linebacker because you really needed one after Shazier. You traded first for Minka, which ended up working. And then you draft a running back in the first, and then Kenny Pickett, which didn't work at all. I think that's also another thing that you see the best teams doing as opposed to the worst teams is drafting the best player available as opposed to just a position you desperately need. And then with that, building through the draft or using free agency, I'm kind of old school about it. I like to build through the draft, but if you're like the Steelers from 2016 to 2022, and you really do need a certain spot more than anyone else, I feel like that's kind of where you spend big money on a free agent, as opposed to drafting a guy where he shouldn't be drafted. I love using Terrell Edmonds as an example. They could have very easily just signed a free agent safety to work for a bridge year, as opposed to drafting a guy who shouldn't have even went in the first 2 rounds. And I think, building through the draft should be the model. But if there is a position of absolute dire need, just spend the money in free agency, man. And if it happens to be a bridge player, then so be it.
Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, people, they love to hate on the Rams and that approach that they had that year. But guess what? They won a freaking Super Bowl. So you can never take that away from them. Sure, they had to go through the not having a first-round pick for several years. But you know what? They're back in the playoffs. Like it didn't take them that long to kind of get themselves back to where they once were, vying for a potential championship. And they've drafted well. You look at like Puka Nacua, who came out of nowhere, and Cooper Kupp is still a good player. He's not what he was, but he's still a good player. Just using them as an example. I think that the Steelers have always, and I've always hated this approach. The Steelers, the way they have always approached free agency has been this. We're going to let the first wave go, and then we're going to try and get the best of the second wave. And then after that, we're still not going to feel like we overpay, and then we're going to try and get the bottom of the barrel guys who we think could maybe be a good fit in our system, whatever system we're talking about, offense or defense. They could have, if they cut 4 players, and I've talked about this on my Let's Ride podcast, if they cut 4 players, they could have upwards of $80 million in cap space in this offseason. Okay, what the hell is this? Like rollover minutes back in the day with cell phones? Like I know there's rollover salary cap, but you don't need to roll over a ton. Let's make some moves and get some proven commodities out there, because what you're finding is that NFL rookies, although there are some that are always phenomenal, it does take them time to get acclimated. So if having veterans in the and look at like what they did last year, Deshaun Elliott's, he was not a big name free agent. Turned out phenomenal, but he wasn't like someone that everyone's like, oh my gosh, did you see the Steelers got Deshaun Elliott? I was the guy that said, who the hell's Deshaun Elliott? I'm not going to lie. So You get Patrick Queen, and you're like, oh, I know Patrick Queen. He played for the Ravens, etc. But I think the Steelers need to be more aggressive in free agency this year. That I'm not saying you need to go out and reset the market like Christian Kirk did a few years ago when he signed as a free agent with Jacksonville. But at the same time, you have to be aggressive to go out and get a player that you think is going to make an immediate impact on the team. Unless they're saying, look, 2025 is going to be, we'll use a pirate term. It's a bridge year. If you're a Pirates fan, you know all about that. If it's a bridge year, then you know what? You save that money and you roll it over and you sign Justin Fields or Russell Wilson to a 1 or 2 year deal. And you say, we're going to take our lumps. We're going to win as many games as we can. And in 2026, when we think that's when the quarterback's going to be available, that's when we're going to be aggressive to get him. And that's when we're going to spend a ton of money. I don't know that they'll never do that. They'll never do that. But it's just, I wish they would be a little bit more aggressive, in my opinion, in free agent.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if you want to consider Patrick Queen the biggest splash, free agent we've signed, but the numbers kind of suggest that. So I don't know if Omar Khan maybe is going to be looking to go that route a little bit more than what we've seen in years past. I think it's interesting you talked about Deshaun Elliott, because me and Colin, we were like the only two guys pounding the table for Deshaun Elliott when that signing happened. We're like celebrating. I'm like, I think our viewership has dropped. It's actively dropping.
Guilty as charged.
But, he was a fantastic signing, but he also fits the system. And I think sometimes people talk about, like, should guys be positionless, versatile guys? But I think sometimes it's, the organization almost feels like they get too enamored with these guys that are versatile. And I think they try to force it at times. And we've seen that in recent memory look at a guy like Kevin Dotson. I mean, he was great in his position. He moves to the other side. It just doesn't work out. So he moves back to the right side in the Rams organization, and he now, he's getting a big payday, right? So I think sometimes we don't necessarily even just draft or try to get free agents that fit the system. And Elliott was a perfect example of just perfect fit for our system, and it worked out. He didn't have to be the greatest athlete in the world or the greatest player in the world. Like, turned out to be one of the best defenders on the team all year. So, I think that's another piece that we seem to be kind of missing out on right now as an organization.
Well, hey, Trent, real quick before I don't mean to interrupt you, but what you just said about Kevin Dotson does that not scream mismanagement of the roster? The fact that this guy was put out of position, you never gave him an opportunity on the right side and said, we're just going to trade you for piddlings, like for nothing. Yeah. It was like a pick swap. So at that point, we also have to address the giant elephant in the room of, are the coaches good enough? And are they evaluating the talent properly? And that's scary about free agency, because when you talk about free agent fit, one guy that does great here, and I love how Steeler fans will watch, the playoffs, and they'll say, oh, if that guy was on the Steelers, he probably sucked because the Steelers coaching staff wouldn't put him in a position to succeed, if we're being honest here. So we have to keep that in the back of our minds too. And so that might be a reason why I'm okay if they don't go super aggressive, now that I say that.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny you bring that up too, because why did we have to move Dotson? Because we brought in James Daniels, a right guard, when our need was left guard. So it moves Dotson over to the left side, and then all of a sudden, Daniels was an upgrade at the time, but did you need to have Daniels, or could you have gotten a guy like maybe Isaac Seumalo a year when he was a year younger or something like that, where you could have brought a guy in who's a natural left guard? I mean, it's stuff like that I think that I know some people make a big deal about positions, others don't, but to me, it's like you're not fitting what your team needs at the time. So sorry, Colin.
No, you're okay. I feel like along with that, it seems like guys come to Pittsburgh to just to fail. And, I think a buddy of ours, Trent, Flip, obviously, he likes to point out all the time that players don't really, very seldom does a player do well after Pittsburgh. So is that like a developmental problem? Is that like some unicorn scheme? I don't know. And then, I think what you mentioned was positionless players. It is the funniest thing ever. And that was why Omar Khan is so much better than Kevin Colbert. Can you think of Mike Mitchell, Sean Davis in the second round, Morgan Burnett, Mark Barron, Avery Williams? You had so many linebacker / safety hybrids that were awful that Kevin Colbert just loved. And he drafted DeMarvin Leal. DeMarvin Leal was the most obvious tweener ever. like the most
Yeah.
obvious tweener. I mean, he's way, way too small to play like a Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, and he's way, way too out of shape and slow to play edge rusher. And you're going to use a 3rd round pick on something like that. I think it's just a testament to, I just think the blueprint of what Omar Khan is doing. That's why I refuse to give up on it. And I think the fact that, Jeff mentioned, we always wait till after the first wave. I mean, that Patrick Queen signing, as though it was a middle linebacker and definitely an overpay, I think it was very kind of a relief to see like Omar Khan give that kind of money to a high profile player, because we haven't seen that in so long. So
that's true. That's true.
So what would you guys think would be kind of like, I'm going to look at the offensive line because we've invested so much in that group in the last couple of years here. What would you think is a reasonable time frame to expect to see returns on that? Because I feel like we've got to be pushing the envelope on that coming this year.
It's got to be next year. Like it literally has to. It has to be 2025, right? Like, right? Like it'll be Broderick's 3rd year. Fautanu, I give Fautanu the benefit. It's a freak injury. How many times do guys like dislocate their kneecap? Like, come on. Zach Frazier, fantastic player, top 4 center in the league. Mason McCormick, he's not really a starting center or starting right guard in the league. I'm sorry, he's really just not. He had some just absolutely egregious reps on tape, and it's just like, it's kind of frustrating at times too, because of the fact that he kind of peaked in the middle of the year, and towards the last few weeks of the year, he was just horrible across the board. That part itself was frustrating. But if I'm Pittsburgh, man, you got to find a way to choose Daniels over Sayamalo. You have to. You cannot continue. I get it. Sayamalo's got the higher profile, but he's 32. James Daniels, 27? Yeah. He was the best guard in the league for 5 straight weeks before he got hurt. Like, I just think that if we don't see a return in 2025, I think there's some serious problems.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. There's so many questions surrounding the offensive line.
So many.
And there shouldn't be, with the draft capital that has been placed into that the last 2 seasons. So you bring up 2nd round pick Frazier, 4th round pick McCormick. You talk about 1st round pick, traded up to get him, by the way, Broderick Jones, who still has played one freaking game at his natural position of left tackle. How do you evaluate that? And they'll say, well, they see him in practice. Okay, he can't beat out Dan Moore. That doesn't give me a lot of hope. Troy Fautanu, who beat out Broderick Jones at the right side, and that was after missing all of preseason due to the injury he suffered against Houston. That doesn't give me a warm, fuzzy feeling about Broderick Jones. And so now you're going to put him at the left tackle spot. You have to, because it is year 3, like Colin said. You hope Zach Frazier and even Mason McCormick, but the guard position, I think, is an under-the-radar huge need for the Steelers. Because unless you think that Mason McCormick, 4th round, 2nd-year player, is the guy, and I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, was a left guard in college throughout
100%. The entire time.
Yeah, so unless you're going to pull a Kevin Dotson here, you could move him over, and you could say, Sayamalu, thank you for your services. I hope you enjoyed the Pro Bowl games. We'll see you later. And you bring back James Daniels. But again, the question is, he ruptured his Achilles tendon. Now, as someone that is in the fitness realm and has a health background, there is no guarantee that he can return back to what he was prior to. They've made some serious advancements in that surgery, but man, that's another huge question on the offensive line. I can't say that if I'm the Steelers, I'm feeling comfortable about the offensive front heading into 2025, but it should be the year that you start to see some big returns from that group.
Agreed. And kind of talking about, you mentioned guard being a need. I'd love to dive right into that. So where do you feel, Jeff, I'm going to throw this one right back to you since you brought this up. What do you feel like maybe our top 5 needs going into free agency and the draft might be right now?
Yeah. So for me, when I do the team needs, and I did this a couple weeks ago on my podcast, I always try to decipher, okay, do I think they should approach them in free agency, the draft, or both? Because there are some positions where you would say, look, we just need a veteran. We're not going to look to draft a player at this position. So that's a team need, yes, but there's a specific way we should be addressing this. There are some that are both. Like, for instance, the top one for me is quarterback. Like, if you don't have a quarterback in this league, you have nothing. And so I could see people say, well, they'll just do this, that, or the other. They don't have a quarterback. Like, Skylar Thompson is the only quarterback under contract right now for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That should scare the crap out of you.
You don't think he's going to lead us to this promised land?
Hey, some might say he's the second best quarterback from the 2023 draft class, but I'm not going to get it. So for me, I look at this and say quarterback is number one. I don't like this draft, the draft class. This very much reminds me of that draft class in 2023 where the Steelers said, we need a quarterback. We're going to take one no matter what anyone else says. I would rather prefer they wait till 2026 to draft a quarterback, but that's just my own personal preference. So I think that in a perfect world, you try and lock up Justin Fields before free agency even starts. Go back to what Baker Mayfield did with Tampa Bay last year. Mike Evans did the same. Try and get him a team-friendly 2-year contract. If you want to make it 3 and have that third year basically be meaningless, I'm fine with that. And then you can go out in free agency and get a player that is of a similar ilk. But quarterback's number one. I'm going to say number 2 is cornerback. I'm not a Dante Jackson fan. I just think that he's injured too much. He's not big enough. He's not physical enough. You want another player like a Joey Porter Jr. And some people might say Corey Trice is that guy. The dude's been hurt a lot in his first 2 years in the league. And so while I love the fact that he could be healthy and he could be an answer, I'm not going to rely on it. I was pounding the table last year for a Stephon Gilmore to come to Pittsburgh, and he played really good. He had a good season for Minnesota. He still had some juice left in the tank. I don't want a Patrick Peterson who has nothing left in the tank, but give me a cornerback at number 2. And that could be draft and free agency. Wide receiver is 3. It could be a 2A, 2B situation there. They need free agency. They need draft. I would trade George Pickens tomorrow if I could, because I don't think he's worth the headache. You need a culture shift in this locker room. And so cut ties while you can. If his stock is high, if you can get a pick for him, I think there's going to be some free agent receivers that are going to be out there. There's some trade options out there. I think receiver is 3. I go defensive front, whether that's defensive tackle, defensive end, however you want to describe it, as 4. And then 5 is running back, because I don't think they're going to bring back Najee Harris. I think Jalen Warren will get a deal as a restricted free agent. And what do you have after that? I mean, Jonathan Ward was signed as a reserve future contract. You're not going to go into a season with Jalen Warren and Jonathan Ward as your depth. You want to have someone else that's a little bit more of a proven commodity, and or a draft pick that's like a day 2 pick that you've seen those players have success in the NFL. So that's my top 5.
Colin, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, vast majority, I'm with Jeff. I completely agree. Quarterback's number 1, right? I mean, we're watching gods play. We are, right? Say what you want about Jalen Hurts, but he in 4 seasons as a starter, he's got him to 2 damn Super Bowls, 4 playoff appearances. Like, say what you want, but that's the fact. They're not doing that with Kenny Pickett. They're probably not doing it with Justin Fields. I would say I'm so with Jeff on that. I lock up Justin Fields as soon as I possibly can, because he's at least usable. Let's use it usable. He's a usable quarterback. He's obviously not your answer, but he's a usable quarterback. Or I could also see, if it were me personally, I don't even know if I would go Justin. I would find a guy who can allow you to just naturally tank 2025. Kyle Allen even. I'm serious. If you want to find your quarterback, you're not finding him with the 20th pick. You're not finding him with the 18th pick. You sure as hell not finding him with the 31st pick. You're finding him with the top 10.
Lamar Jackson. You could look at him. You could look at your boy. You could look at Jordan Love. Late round picks.
Those are the anomalies, man.
I mean, it's not
like
as
17. It's like a 17% success rate with quarterback drafted after the top 10 since 2000. That's 25-year sample size.
You're right. I get it. I'm just busting your balls a little bit.
Yeah, my boy Jordan Love was, but yeah, I mean, he sat under Rodgers for 3 years. That's also an anomaly. But number 2, I actually have defensive line. I'm a big fan of building the trenches. Everything that Philly does, I want to replicate. And the fact of the matter is, you have a nose tackle who's a natural 3 tech. Larry Ogunjobi's a free agent. Cam Hayward, whether you like it or not, he's 36. So, and you have no depth. I love how Jeff kind of said, he likes to order it how like they could draft or free agent or both. I would hammer that position this offseason. If that means you have to cut 7th rounder Logan Lee, fine. That means you have to cut Monty Adams, fine. but I would love to spend a super high draft pick, ideally the first, and hammer it in the free agency market as well. You need depth, you need a starter, and you need to move a guy around. And your other starter's 36, so that's a undisputed for me. Number 3, I have corner. Again, not a Dante Jackson fan either. Do what you want to do with Beanie Bishop. I think you should start him next year. Out of all the slot corners in the NFL, he's perfectly average at that position. It's not a premium, whatever. And then, and I think that should be a high draft pick too. I've said since December, if Benny Morrison's available at 20, you take him. He's a proven thing. He's still a little on the young side. He plays kind of your system. I just think that would be ideal as well. And that's another position you need depth. Somehow, some way, you also need depth there. And then receiver at 4. So the way I look at the receiver position, I completely understand where if people have receiver in their top 3, I understand where you're coming from. Arthur Smith's system is something that doesn't really need a second receiver that bad. Say you do go with George Pickens, and by the way, Jeff beautifully said, I'm trading him yesterday, George Pickens, if I could. You kind of have to live with your picks with Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin, because like it or not, Pat Freiermuth is going to be your second target in an Arthur Smith system. Plus the fact you're going to run the ball a whole lot of the time. So at this point, where we sit currently, I'm kind of just living with the Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin picks. Find a way for those guys to be your wide receiver 2 and 3. If you want to get an average level free agent, that's totally fine as well. I just don't think I'd spend huge money or huge capital on a wide receiver 2 when you really don't need one in an Arthur Smith system. And then let's see, that gets me to 4. And then 5, again, running back, they're not going to re-sign Najee. It's not even a debate at this point. Find yourself a starter. I've already made my list of those 2. I got a guy that I've had my eye on, Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn. Jeff, do your homework on him. I just think that you could get a Jarquez Hunter in the 3rd or 4th round. You do that. How many teams in this league have a starting running back that was drafted after the day 2? Yeah. How many of the elite teams, for that matter? Obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs was like 10th overall, but Aaron Jones for the Vikings was a 5th rounder. Isaiah Pacheco for the Chiefs is a 7th rounder. So, that'd be my list there.
So I did this a little bit differently than probably most people would. So I actually did my list a little bit based on what I think the strengths of the draft are going to be. So first of all, quarterback is obviously number 1. So that's everybody's number 1. I said to re-sign Justin Fields, get it done quickly and get it over with. Let's move on. He's going to be the 2025 starting quarterback. I've honestly a little shocked it's not done yet. Like, I don't know if there's a window here where they can't. Like, I'm like, this thing's got to be done before long. So number 2, I have cornerback. I agree. I think Dante Jackson, man, he's not the guy. Number 1, if he's, not hurt, I mean, he's not been there. He's not good in man coverage. I feel like this is where the defense wants to go. They want to run more man coverage. They can't because of the guys that they have right now. I think you need another guy. If they drafted a corner in the 1st round, I would not be upset. Number 3 for me is wide receiver, because I don't think this draft is that deep at wide receiver. It's kind of an anomaly from what we've seen in the last three drafts where they've been super deep. I think there's a pretty big fall off. So if you're going to draft a guy to be your wide receiver 2, then you need to get him pretty early on. I feel like it's almost got to be in the 1st or 2nd round, or you're really going to be kind of digging for the scrap heap, so to speak, because these guys you're going to get in the 3rd and 4th round, I don't think are going to be like starting caliber guys. I've changed a little bit because I actually had a different one up here, but I think nose tackle is another one I would throw in there. We talked about this before, Colin. I really want to move Benton in the defensive tackle spot, get him into that Larry O role, and get like a big physical dude, that Deion Walker kid out of Kentucky type of build, big physical monster, still has some athleticism. Get us a little bit back into the Javon Hargraves type of player. You know what I mean? The guy who just, you can plug in the middle and he's not going anywhere. I think that would be kind of my 4. And then depending on where we go from there, it's I'd almost draft a slot corner 5th. I love Beanie Bishop. Colin, you and I both like Beanie Bishop. But we saw as we started to play some of these better teams that had multiple wide receivers and they used a lot of quick game stuff. Sutton got absolutely torched the whole way down the stretch. You have to have somebody better there. If they believe in Beanie, I'm okay not doing that. I think Beanie's got some limitations. We could probably find an upgrade there. So if you fill that through free agency, I'd be cool with that too. But I think that slot corner position needs to be a focus. So I don't know. That's kind of my top 5. And I didn't throw running back in there, not because obviously we don't need one, but I just think there are 30 draftable running backs. You can draft a running back in the 5th and 6th round, and you're going to get a guy who can start right now. So I'm cool waiting on that position. I actually listen. I like Khalil Mullings out of Michigan, and I hate to say that because I freaking hate that school. But man, that kid is a stud. He is 235 pounds, converted linebacker. He can run away from people, though. I watched a lot of their games this year where that dude was just, if he had a seam, man, he was running away from guys at 235 pounds, which is pretty impressive. So I think he and Jalen would make a nice 1-2 punch. And I think you can get him in like the 6th round. So, I mean, you would not waste any capital on him at all. So I don't know. That was kind of the list I had. So we really are not that far off, I feel like, in a lot of what we're looking at on this. Do you have any positions that you maybe want to see filled exclusively through free agency? Go for it.
I have 2, but Colin can go ahead if he wants.
I'm giving Trey Smith a blank check. I'll tell you that right now. Kansas City's gone. I'm giving him whatever the hell he wants and more, by the way. I think they just have to figure out the offensive line, man. Like, you want to get a quarterback in 2026, you're not doing it with Mason McCormick starting at guard. I promise you that. And then, I'm sorry, you said strictly free agency was this one?
Yeah, I mean, any positions you want to see filled through free agency?
Yeah, I mean, other than giving Trey Smith a blank check, I would say receiver. I completely 1,000% understand the argument for a receiver to get drafted high. I really do. But last year was the year to do it. 1,000%. Yeah. I mean, I literally did my list of receivers, and I have them right here, man. I mean, Emeka Egbuka, he's a glorified slot guy. Matthew Golden, what kind of tape does he have? Elik Iomenor, those are your 3rd, 4th, and 5th best receivers, and you know for a fact that McMillan and Burden are going to go in the top 15. Emeka Egbuka is probably going to go to Cincy at 17. So you're looking at, a 6 foot 195 redshirt junior and a 6'2", 210 redshirt junior that reminds me of Chase Claypool. So I just feel like receiver last year was kind of the year to do it. They waited a long time and kind of panicked on the Roman Wilson pick, in my opinion. I would say you find, in terms of contracts, like mid-level, like just, somewhat pay him decent money, but somewhat kind of cheap.
Yeah.
I just think there's too many bigger fish to fry. You need a guard. You need to figure out a way to get your offensive line. If that means spend $70 million in free agency to build your offensive line, then do it. If you want to get a running back in the 2nd round, honestly, that's okay. But I just think there's so many bigger fish to fry than wide receiver, especially when we don't have a quarterback anyway. So would you rather Justin Fields get some elite receiver and he gets hurt, or would you rather give Justin Fields a bunch of nobodies and have your 2026 3rd overall pick get a big time receiver too? I don't know.
Fair point. Yeah. Fair point. My 2 positions that I had as free agency only. Guard is one. You don't need to start over with a rookie. You just got to get a proven commodity at guard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another position that this was 7th on my list total, but it's just free agency only is actually safety. DeMonte Casey is a free agent, and I don't think if I'm the Steelers, I don't bring him back. I just think he doesn't provide enough to have me bring him back. I can get a DeMonte Casey, I feel like a dime a dozen right now on the open market, but I could get an upgrade. So Deshaun Elliott, he fits that role perfectly for what they wanted Keanu Neal to be the year prior. He can play the line of scrimmage. He's much better in coverage. tackler, open field tackler. I would get whatever safety they need to in free agency that's going to let Minkah Fitzpatrick maybe somehow, some way reclaim some of what he used to be. We haven't seen the best of Minkah the last 2 seasons. Everyone that's watched the games knows that. I'm not looking for a top tier free agent signing here, but I want them to address safety as in a free agent format so that they can get a player who could be that third safety. They love to run 3 safety packages in Terrell Austin's system. Since he's not going anywhere, get a good safety that could potentially come in and free up Minkah and help round out that 3 safety look they like to run.
Yeah, I agree. That is definitely something that needs to happen. For me, I'm on board. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and I'm like, we need to do something at guard. And then he said, I think Mason McCormick. He's actually a guy who's a reporter. He's in the locker room, and he's like, I think McCormick's going to be the starter again next year. I'm like, I just don't see how you get back into the next season with that guy starting again. I mean, I like the kid. I think he's got some grit. Maybe he develops into something, but you don't draft a 4th round guy to start year 1 and year 2. I mean, that's just not the blueprint. So I agree. I think guard should be a position of need in the offseason. I would love if Daniels recovers. That's going to be a tough one to recover by the time you start the season with. How much of the season would he miss? I don't know. I really think James Daniels is a good player. That'd be nice to find a way to get him back on the team. But otherwise, you have to address it through free agency. And I really would like to bring a free agent wide receiver in here, like Darius Slayton. I mean, I think he'd be a nice fit. Not going to be a guy who absolutely needs the ball 100% of the time. He played for the Giants. He's already used to bad offenses. So, can't get much worse than the Giants, right? I mean, they've been horrible for a couple seasons. So, but he's a bigger physical guy who can block, and I think he's a guy who could really fit a much better version of what Van Jefferson was last year. So I'd like to see that brought in as the other free agency, which kind of takes away one of the top needs for me at wide receiver. Then you don't need to draft a receiver so highly. You can address some of these other needs much better, like moving up for D-line and cornerback early in the first couple of rounds. And I think that might be kind of the blueprint for what I'm looking at right now. And as we see some of these guys go through their workouts and more of the Senior Bowl and things like that, all this stuff will change a little bit. But I just think for me, that's kind of where I'm at. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, Jeff, so I wanted to throw this out at you guys and just kind of get your opinions on something. So we hear the term the con artist quite a bit. Do you guys think there's a lot of difference and a big change between Omar Khan and what we've actually seen with Kevin Colbert so far?
Do you want me to go first?
Go for it. Let's hear it.
So we've talked about this a little bit. Colin alluded to how Omar Khan is more willing to just focus on how he wants to build the team and not so much, Kevin Colbert's drafting for needs. And I will say the last few years of Kevin Colbert's tenure were rough. He was clearly trying to make something from a team that he felt had a good nucleus, and it just didn't. And it ended up jeopardizing the future of the team, but he didn't care. He was on the way out. I will say, and this is not breaking news for me, I think Omar Khan will be as aggressive as the owner will let him. I think Omar Khan is a wheel and deal type of guy. He is willing to make the trade. Look at last offseason as an example. Oh, Deontay Johnson, you're not happy? We'll send you to Carolina. Kenny Pickett, you're not happy? Well, good luck being the backup in Philly. Let's trade and make a pick let's get Justin Fields in the house. That's not normal for a Steelers GM to make those type of moves.
No.
I'm wondering, though, how handcuffed is he going to be? Because every single year I'm covering this team and I hear Art Rooney II talk, the more I think, good Lord, how is this the son of Dan Rooney? How is this guy of the same lineage? Because he is like the complete opposite. Dan Rooney was a guy that made the tough decision at the tough time, whether it was with Chuck Noll telling him, look, I think it's time you move on to your life's work. Or maybe it's talking with Bill Cowher about maybe it's time to move on. Whatever the case is, I feel like Art Rooney is the guy that is, in a way, potentially holding what Khan wants to do and what he wants to build and how he wants to go about his business back a little bit. If they give him full reign, I would really love to see what he could do. But I think there is a stark difference between Kevin Colbert and Omar Khan from their approach, from the execution, and the overall philosophy. I'll leave it at that.
How about you, Colin? Where are you at with that?
I mean, I think that was pretty well said. Kevin Colbert was kind of just trying to make something happen with what he thought was a good. Jeff, that was beautifully said. That was beautifully said.
I do this for a living.
No, that was beautifully said. I just think Omar Khan, I think it helps a lot having Andy Weidel. And I think whether that was Omar Khan's decision to bring in an assistant or Rooney's decision, which I can pretty much guess which of those two it was. I think that helps a lot. And then, I think the concept overall is working, or the philosophy is working. I think the philosophy is it's only his third year as the GM here. I think the philosophy so far is working. I mean, dude, he's hit on 2 drafts in a row. Like,
oh yeah,
both drafts I give an A+. I mean, and I think that if he gets another A+ draft, I think you're looking at a much better GM.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is with bringing up
he threw huge money at a high profile player. Like I said earlier, he actually threw big time money at a high profile free agent. We haven't seen that since James Ferrier in 2002.
Yeah, been a long time.
Like,
yeah, I think the thing that, cause I've actually heard people argue that they don't see much difference between Colbert and Omar Khan, and I totally disagree, because when would you ever have Kevin Colbert going after a Brandon Ayuk who's under contract, trying to make a trade? I mean, whether it worked out or not, that thought would have never even been in their minds. And I think Andy Weidel coming in here was a big thing, because Khan's the money guy. He knows Andy Weidel can build a team. He sees it on the field. It's getting ready to go into the Super Bowl. He was a part of that. Like, you know what I mean? He's under Howie Roseman. So you can tell he used his inexperience to his advantage and says, okay, these are new to me, but let me bring in a guy who knows what he's doing with this stuff, and then I can help make my decisions based on that. So I think it's a pretty stark difference between the two guys so far, and I do see a lot of encouraging things to be looked at right now with this. And I think what Omar Khan, like you said, Colin, 2 great drafts in a row. You don't tend to hit on every single pick, and he's hit on almost all of them in some form or fashion. I mean, to the point where we're talking about Ryan Watts as a 7th round pick might make the 53-man roster. That never happened before. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. So I think you got to take that under consideration where the organization's going forward. So
we once had a 4th round pick not make the 53. So
yes,
Buddy Johnson.
Yes. So, all right, Jeff, I know you're up against the time here, so I want to be mindful of your time. So I appreciate you coming on and joining us today. It was a lot of fun. Yeah,
no problem. You reached out and said you wanted to have me on. I'd love to talk Steelers. And if you want to check out my work at Steel Curtain Network, you can do so anywhere you get your podcast. My show is the Let's Ride podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning. Or steelcurtainnetwork.com is our website, where I also write as well. So check it out. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you coming on, Colin. Appreciate you as always. And for everybody watching, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Look forward to talking to you all again.
All right. See you guys.
Thanks.